Okay, well, everybody, welcome. It is so good to have you here. First staffy I'm at for the year, and I'm really excited to be here. So we're in 21 days of prayer and fasting. Yes. How's everyone doing with their fast? So good. So good. It's amazing. Everyone loves it. Anyone... I'd love to hear, what are you believing for during these 21 days? Just a few people, what are you believing for over these 21 days?
When I went to visit my brother over New Year's in New York, he started speaking pretty optimistically about trying to find a church community out there. And so I'm really believing that in the next couple of weeks, he'll actually make his way to a church in Hoboken.
Nice.
Let's go.
I'm just believing for like a new fresh fire in my school and kind of in the Bible study and like the ministry, this very small little ministry in an art school that's been planted, and we're just getting so many words from God about how he wants to move this next year. So I'm believing that in these like first initial 21 days, he's just gonna give more revelation on top of that and kind of like start us off running really fast.
I love that. I want to know what Katori Seals is believing for. Cottery?
Man, as I'm journaling about it, I'm believing for continued breakthrough. I think these last couple of years has been a lot of deliverance and inner healing. I think there's a continuum of what the Spirit is teaching me. And just a continue of like dying to self. I feel like I got this dream this year of like me being in a season of training. So just a continuum of that, of like how God is moving me in this season of training.
Come on. Let's go.
I love that, Katori. I've always loved and respected your faithfulness, diligence, and grit towards continual growth and improvement and personal health and healing. It's remarkable, and I've known you for a long time now, and it's never differed. It's never ever differed. And you're one of the few people that I can say that have showed very definable markers where you've either walked something back or you've changed the way you act or feel or think about something. And I just want to say, and just celebrate you for a minute and say that it's very admirable the way that you grow, and that's what it is. It is growth. You genuinely have grown and do grow yearly, and that's rare. A lot of people will hit a growth spurt and then cap out, but not you, sir. You're really great, and I appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And then Sergio Marquez, I'm just believing big things for you this year, mate. God just impressed it on my heart. I just feel like your consistency is going to pay off. And I feel like God kind of even just put on my heart for you to maybe, I got the kind of phrase like add more fuel to the fire. And I think consistency's been a great marker. And I feel like now it's going to be about you verbalizing some things you're going to go for and maybe putting some goals out there publicly that you're going to chase. And I believe that, you've got a great foundation for that to become something. So just love your faithfulness. I don't think there's a staffy that you have not been at. I really feel like Sergio, LaShonda, Ceci, Brianna, Miss Powers, Sabrina, just some of the faithful people that are always there. Lauren Clampett, not so much, but little head pops into the screen. All right. Go with me on this one. This is a series that I feel that I want to start. I've been wrestling with two series, just so you all know, like at the moment. One I think is a Sunday series, and I'm going to talk about biblical conflict. I just think we could all be better at it. Like we could all get better at conflict. And there's so much around it. I think we live in a day and age where people are so quick to quit something that could be great. And I think if you're going to have good relationships in life, you've got to have a habit of working at them.
Yeah.
And I remember when I first got saved, I think it was Pastor Brian that was Houston that was preaching at the time, and he said this statement. I was never very I didn't have a lot of friends because I was just insecure. And he said this statement. I always looked at it as a victim, no one wants to be my friend. And he said this statement. It's Proverbs, and it says, "A man of many friends must himself be friendly." Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, I might not have friends because I'm not friendly. And it was just this great statement. And I thought that conflict, all those things, I think it's something. I've been wrestling with that one. I'm going to preach. But then today, I got a different one, and I think this one's going to be the staffy one that we're going to unpack for the next few weeks, depending on how today's goes. If it sucks, then we'll put it to bed. But it has been, it's a new one, and I'm titling it Grammatical Leadership. Grammatical Leadership. And it's the simple thought that basically, grammar is the structure and the form that is, and the rules that are applied to language that color language and give it its meaning. If you don't have good grammar, people will not know what you mean. And I'm a subject of it. I'm a terrible writer. Punctuation for me was seen as something when I would just be like, it's like an unnecessary roadblock. It's like a speed hump. Why do I need it? I just want to be able to write at full speed and let people gain what they gain, But then I quickly, as I got older, realized that people would read back what I wrote and it just sounded nothing like what it was in my head. In my head, it was like this incredible story. And when people read it back, it was like, and then I went to the shops, do you want to come with me? Because I wanted to. It was like just this long thing. And so this morning, as I was getting ready, I felt like, God kind of just seeded as a thought, Holy Spirit, or maybe if it sucks, it was just me, and the fact that I'm fasting and my brain's not getting enough food. I thought, you know what? I wonder if our leadership is saying what we want it to say. I wonder if your leadership is saying, and here's the thing, I'm going to put this out there from the beginning, and I think we've always said this, but hey, leadership's not something you arrive at. It's an ongoing journey. You're not going to be a savant. I think it's just you're a forever student is leadership. So everything I'm preaching here, I'm learning. Anything I'm saying is something I'm discovering myself. But so this all is preaching to me as well as hopefully you. Which, by the way, that's a philosophical difference that I think maybe both Ords and I share. Some preachers will never, ever, ever share what they are personally learning from. They think it's embarrassing, I've heard. I've heard that multiple times from conference platforms. I'm different. I like to share the meal that I'm currently eating. If that's what God's working on me, that's what I work on with you. It's just what it is. I'm not embarrassed about it because I'm by no means perfect. So this is what God's working with me, all right? So grammatical leadership. Is your leadership saying what you want it to say? Is your leadership telling the story you want it to tell? A second note is this. In Australia, for all the Aussies, a full stop. For you guys, you call it a period. Are you using the things, and do you know how to use the different elements of punctuation to really let your leadership say what it needs to say? Sometimes it's time to start a new paragraph. Sometimes that story's closed, and sometimes that story is just one story in a volume of books. Sometimes you need to put some things in parentheses. Some things deserve all caps. And some things need a comma. Some things need better adjectives. There's just all these things at our disposal. And those that know how to use them really write great stories. So in the area of leadership, I wanted to talk about some of those things. And I'm going to do my best to pull some parallels from some grammatical constructs and then how they would go in your leadership. Okay?
Yes.
Okay, so here we go. The first one that I want to talk about is what in your leadership deserves, or in leadership in general, deserves parentheses. What in leadership should deserve parentheses? That sense of this is the bigger thing that's happening, but in the context of what's happening in this story and sentence, I'm going to put this in parentheses because I need you to know this. It's bracketed because it's important, and it's also bracketed because it's slightly different. It's almost like if I could interject this in the sentence, I would. So what do I take that as? I think this culture should always get its own parentheses. Meaning, in everything you do, there should be a implied parentheses in the sentence, because culture is the way we've said it many, many a time, it's the way you think, feel, and act. And what I've noticed in leadership is that if we don't all think and feel and act on the same set of values, we actually can read sentences differently. And I think that's what happens a lot is people all experience the same circumstance or situation and take it different. And the power of culture is not that we all brainwash or we all do the same thing. I mean, people are going to be individuals irrespective. But what it does give us all is a shared vocab. A shared vocab of this is what this means to all of us. In your own home, it might mean something different. In your own preference of doing things with your own friend group, it might mean something different. But here, this is what this means. And if you just were to write that in this point, how could you go and really make a better corporate vocab of this is what this means? Yeah. So that's why we started Growth Track, Growth Track was simply started because what we realized is that we're in the Midwest and the prevailing Protestant expression in the Midwest is Catholicism. Like that's the biggest, I don't know if you could call that a Protestant, but like that's the biggest expression of Christ that people would know here is Catholicism, and then Lutherans. So it's a very conservative approach to church. Well, obviously, if you've been to People Church, you know that it's maybe doesn't fit that bill. And what we found is a lot of people were misinterpreting our experience. And what they found was not leaving because of what I said, but leaving because of what I didn't say. They're like, I didn't hear you say this. Do you value communion? You don't look like the kind of place that does communion. I didn't hear you talk about this. Do you do this? And so people were really kind of trying to locate, is this a place for me and do you value what I value? So what we started and what we start every growth track with is, hey, we're starting a new norm here. Yeah. I know this is where you came from. I know that some of you came from the club, some of you came from Catholic church, some of you came from from the South where Shannon was in a snake handling church when she grew up and Roll Tide. And, all of that kind of stuff. And so we always say this, hey, this is how we do it. This is what we do. If you're a leader in your workplace and you've just freshly taken over a team, make sure that one, you know your company's culture and values, yes, and that you're good at carrying them. Yes. Wherever there is room for you to then add your flavor to your team, make sure your one of your front and center objectives is to put that in parentheses. Add it to every sentence and put it in parentheses. This is how we think. This is how we feel. We are what are you? Are you a risk-taking team? You better make that known. You better make it known that the way that you're addressing your ideals and the way you're making decisions is from a risk-taking perspective. In the book Legacy, it speaks about the New Zealand All Blacks, and one of their values is we hit the gap. Meaning that they're a risk-taking team. If they could pass or they could try and find a gap in the line to break the line, they're going to try break the line. What's amazing about that is now you've got a whole bunch of people that know this is how we do it. Yeah. And so when you're leading a team, have you decided what your cultures are and what are your differentiators that make your team what it is? Because I find most leaders get frustrated that their team doesn't think like them, but they also don't clue them in to the way they think. So that idea of grammatical leadership in this is, I think we could pull an analogy from parentheses in that everything you do, let culture be at the forefront. The second thing, if you're in a church leadership perspective, I think we should always have theology in parentheses. Why? Because it's kingdom culture. Good theology is kingdom culture. It's the way it's the way God thinks about things, would act on things, and feels about things. We know that God feels a certain way about, people that won't extend forgiveness when he sent his son and gave grace. We've got good parables that give us an idea about that. We know that God has a certain way that he thinks about money and finance. He's got a way that he thinks about that. God's got a way that he thinks and feels and acts on obedience. Yeah. So if you want to live your life and you're writing the story of your life, have you placed in parentheses like theology? Yeah. Basically good kingdom culture. in the way that you act. Because if you're writing your financial story and you're writing your relational story and you're writing your even your community story about church, and it's all based on your own ideologies, then obviously you and God are going to conflict. And if you're going to conflict with God, why do we see so much conflict in the church at the moment? Because I think there's a lot of people that are taking church and filtering it through their own ideas, and not enough people filtering it through biblical ideas. I'm not going to say we're going to agree on everything, otherwise there wouldn't be denominations. That's a thing. But I think we should agree about a whole lot more. Because the Bible's clearer on a whole lot. You know what I mean? It's clear on forgiveness. It's the reason I want to do biblical conflict as a Sunday message, because it's clear on how to do that. It's clear on relationships. It's clear on praise, on worship. It's clear on a lot of things that we all seem to just not be clear about. So I think that the idea of putting parentheses if you're in the church culture, and even if you're building your life as a believer, putting theology in parentheses in every sentence that you're writing, I think is crucial.
Yeah, come on.
Second thing I wanted to kind of make draw a parallel from is the question mark. So the question mark is a really good one because it's done in either what's it called, a interrogative statement, or it's basically I forget another name of the statement, but it's basically letting somebody know something. You want to know something about someone. So I want to know what James's favorite color is. I want to know what he likes food, what kind of food he likes. Or I'm asking a question because I'm wanting to create feedback. What's the question mark in leadership? The question mark in leadership is creating a two-way environment. The question mark in leadership, and it kind of ties into the next one, and I'll give them to you both at the same time. I think leaders don't often use the period and the question mark in the right context. I think a lot of leaders put a question mark where they should put a period, and they put a period where they should put a question mark. Meaning, they leave some things for debate that the leader must make a call on. And they put other things up that is undebatable that the leadership should actually want two-way conversation on. And so how do you learn how to better communicate the different aspects of your leadership and know what needs a period and what needs a question mark? I think if you get those wrong, you will absolutely tell a very different story than what you want. If you don't know when to use a period, a question mark, you'll be the emperor who had no clothes. Yeah. If you don't know that story, everyone know that story? Do I have to explain that? Does everyone know the emperor that had no clothes? It's pretty self-explanatory, kind of. You might just be like, well, I don't know why there was a naked emperor. But the emperor who had no clothes, everyone was so afraid of him, basically, that they never told him he was naked, and then he got angry because he's like, I'm naked. I think there are some aspects of our leadership that if we don't invite open-ended conversation and we don't lead with a question mark, then we're never going to know certain things. I think 2023 was a huge question mark year for us as a church. It was like, okay, how can we do this better? Hey, talk to me about your volunteer experience. Hey, talk to me about this experience. Hey, talk to me about this experience. Talk to me is a statement that a leader needs to know how to place.
Yeah, very good.
And I want to encourage you that as you go into your leadership, how do you create two-way dialogue? The more you create it, the better it is. In fact, I just lived that scenario even just now. Like, it's so important. And why is feedback important? Can I tell you, when in doubt, ask questions.
Yes.
I kind of was thinking I was going to do this. When it comes to social media, the theme of my life is I was gonna. Over my social, I was going to do a post and say things I learned this year. And one of the things I can definitely say I learned this year through some family things that we went through, extended family, and some riffs and things. I know this much. No relationship has ever gotten better by lack of conversation. Never. The minute you stop having conversation, you gave breathing room to assumption. The minute you stop having conversation, you gave actual lifespan to offense. The minute you stop having conversation, you killed a relationship or at least dated it. It'll never get any better than the last conversation you had. It's just a fact. Nothing gets better. And I get it. Sometimes it feels like you're having the same conversation. But in marriage, you know what I've learned? Some things Ords and I have met eye to eye on in year one. And other things we maybe have had 88 conversations on. But I'm so thankful for the 88 because it was the 88th that broke it. And I think we live in this culture and this pretense sometimes that if it's difficult, it's not right. I don't think so.
Right.
There's plenty of things we could learn from that difficult is good. A difficult workout brings great things. And spiritually, a difficult season, one that rocks you, actually just builds rock solid faith. So there's not like a problem with difficult all the time. And so when it comes to this idea of, you know, the question mark and the two-way conversation, can I encourage you, don't be one that expects it, but doesn't live it. There's two ways to leadership. If you're gonna ask for two-way conversation, you got to be somebody that asks for it, but delivers it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, if I'm not asking questions of each of you, hey, what do you mean by that, Jimmy? What do you mean by that, Courtney? That's another time that leaders will not use a question mark. You know why? They don't want to hear the answer. Quite often, we won't actually ask the question because we're afraid of the answer. And the answer isn't sometimes that we won't like what they say about us. Sometimes as a leader, you don't want to bring something up because you know the person's not going to respond well. It's easier for me, Shannon walks in with an attitude, maybe 4 days in a row. It's easier for me not to ask why. Because I don't want to maybe know that there's an attitude. It's easier for me to go, hey Shannon, you're the only person on team, even though it's a cultural requirement for staff members to tithe. Why don't you? Easier not to. Because what if she gets upset? What if she gets upset and then we lose a business manager? How do I explain that? But what's my role? What's my role? I was just somewhere and I heard someone say you can only be half a pastor. And I agreed. The person that said it was accurate. I knew what he meant straight away. He's saying, in today's day and age, if I really tell you what I think as your pastor, you'll get offended and leave. So I can't really be a full leader over your life. And I grew up under someone that told me you'll only ever go as far as you let your mentor go hard. It's kind of like you're only going to get as good at the gym as you'll let your personal trainer push you. And so like I kind of was like, I resonate that. But you know what? I got convicted. And I wasn't disagreeing with what he was saying because he obviously didn't agree with it. He was, yeah. But where it convicted me was the phrase that ran through my mind, I think it was the Holy Spirit, was this. Could you imagine if Isaiah, in his time, and all the biblical prophets said, oh, these days you can only be half a prophet. If you're a full prophet, they'll stone you. But they did it anyway. And I think I've been slowly changing my conviction on this a bit because I feel like, you know, once someone tells me God said, well, obviously I can't really challenge. Well, I can challenge it, but I was under the mindset of, well, I'm not going to change your mind. But then I thought, as a shepherd, I don't want the blood on my hands. And at the very least, if what you say God said is not biblical, I'm going to say something. If what you said is like, when you said God said, it's actually thematically incongruent with the way God moves, I'm going to say something. Because the blood's on my hands. And so it was like this sense of like, as a leader, the reason we don't ask questions of many people in our environment is because we don't want them to buck, because if they do, the consequence might be inconvenient. So we would rather tolerate bad culture than take the time to toil the soil and create good culture. So a well-placed question mark in your leadership is when you ask the right questions, irrespective of what it might bring, because you value real conversations because they actually go much further. You can have the perception of healthy or you can work to the reality of healthy, but healthy means you got to get your hands dirty. And a question mark is the least used phrase in leadership or punctuation or grammatical tool in leadership because people don't want that. They don't want to have to deal with the repercussions of it. But here's the other thing. Sometimes you've got the, what would you call them? You've got the consensus leader versus the conviction leader. The consensus leader only uses a question mark because to use a period is too final and too authoritative. They basically don't want to take their place as leader, so they take their place amongst the crowd. Are you a consensus leader? You only do what everybody would want you to do. You don't do what God is asking you to do. Are you a consensus leader? You do what will keep the people happy versus take the people forward. What I've learned in leadership and being a father and being a husband is that today's yes that upsets people is actually tomorrow's thank you in many circumstances. Me saying no to my kids eating everything under the sun is a upset no right now. Like, I can't believe you did that. But when they're fit, it's a thankful. It's a thank you, Dad. And the same thing goes in leadership. If I'm upset, if I'm afraid to tell you no financially, and for a few years, it was always a no financially. It was always a no. People even started to read Shannon wrong. Like, she doesn't want to give you a yes. No, we had boundaries we had to put in place because we had to build margin and we had to teach some things and we had to get some things. But it was a no so that we didn't ever have to face a church that was like, we got to close down tomorrow. Now, it meant that leaders were like, oh, we don't have any money. No one wants to value us. No, we want to value. We'd love to give you the best volunteer breakfast we could ever give you, but we just don't have the money right now. So we can't do it. So sometimes a well-placed no is what you need, but the consensus leader wants to take his place amongst the crowd, keep everybody happy. And what that does is eventually that kills the church. It kills the team. It kills the marriage. It kills the family. And this is why they do it, because they'd rather blame them for asking for it than actually take the responsibility for moving them forward. So it's almost this sense of like, I'm not really wrong if I just did what you all want, am I? But leader is a hard place. Leader's not a popular place. Leader is a conviction place. So sometimes the greatest thing we could learn to do if we're going to tell a better leadership story is to know where to place our yes, our full stop, our period, and where to place our question mark.
So good.
This is something you can practically do everywhere you go. But it's a balance, right? Because you don't want to be so authoritative that you crush the two-way conversation. So what are some things that you should always put a period on? I think you should always put a period on culture. Culture should be evolving, but you should have the last say on it. That's a good way to put your period, right? What's the last say? It's not the only say. Here at People Church, we always believe this. While we're in training or we're in the change rooms and that playbook is getting written, everyone at the table can talk. But there's always going to be someone at each table that has to decide what the play is going to be.
Yeah.
That's the weight of leadership for whoever's leading that table. Now, once they go out and play the game, it's either going to be the right call, it's going to be the wrong call. But when we go back and we watch the game film, everybody talks again. And a good leader will learn from the film and will learn from the table, and a bad leader won't. But the reality still stands. Someone has to have the last call.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of making the last call. Being a leader isn't about being right all the time. I think it's being quick to say sorry, quick to elevate good ideas, and quick to walk some things back. You're going to get it right a lot, but that's okay. You're going to get it wrong a lot too. It's all kind of how it goes. So a well-placed, period is when you have the last word on something. And one of those last words you should always have on is culture. A second thing that as a leader, you should always put the full stop on the period. I can't just say period. I have to say full stop. I can't help it. Is vision. The vision you must have the last word on the vision. Without a vision, the people cast off restraint.
Yes.
And there's very few things a leader must do. Leaders often start to act like busier workers. They think that leadership is doing more when leadership is releasing more. But there are a few things you can never release as a leader. And two of those being, there's about three of them, and there's two of them that you can never release, and it is vision and culture.
Yeah. Great.
That is always your responsibility. So the decision on that vision and the decision on that culture as a leader that's the period on it. That's what you do. I think the other one is always developing leaders. The leadership culture and the leadership and developing leaders of that team, that grow group, whatever it is, that's yours. So even as a grow group leader, I bet you maybe if we put it in that context, some of you might find that you're a consensus grow group leader. You don't really make the last call on the culture of your grow group. Or you don't make the call on what are we going to do? Like, hey, we're all going to town hall because that's where our grow group is and we all committed to run together. Mm-hmm. And there's someone that always runs out of sync. Do you pull them up? Because it's not fair that somebody will only go to grow group when they're going to get what they want, which is prayer for the thing they're going through, but they won't go to grow group when they got to support other people that might need prayer.
Very good.
You honestly always get what you give in leadership. And so I think a well-placed period, here's another thing, a period is often placed in grammatical senses when it has to be just to create a pause. Just to create a pause. Statement's been said and there's a pause between the next statement. I think a full stop, a leader knows when to create pauses. I think pauses are so important because sometimes a well-placed pause allows people to catch their breath to keep telling more of the story.
Yeah.
I think that's something we were working on a lot in 2023 is how do you put a pause? And sometimes as a leader, imagine as a leader, you're the one penning the story and you're penning the team. I have learnt value in telling my team when to stop and telling team members when to stop, not running off the proviso of you tell me when you need to stop. Sometimes it's up to me to tell the team, you got to stop. That's one of the things that a leader's got to do. Hey, we're going to stop for a second. And if it's an hour or if it's a stop for a day, sometimes in our meetings, I'll hit a well-placed pause is sometimes in a meeting. The meeting's not going anywhere. It's getting heated. It's going around in circles. Sometimes there needs to be a pause. That's it. Just a pause will save a meeting sometimes. And sometimes a pause will be an initiative. It doesn't mean the initiatives, most leaders won't put a pause to an initiative because it's almost like this, I've admitted it's the wrong leadership, like the wrong initiative. Sometimes it's not the wrong initiative. It's just a long initiative and it needs to be broken up with pauses. So are you doing are you diving into the Bible? Yeah, that's awesome. And you're doing it all year, awesome. But maybe 3 weeks of the year, you do something different and you give words. It's a small example of how you don't just ride something to death, but you need to give it a pause because the story, people need to take a breath.
Yeah.
And when they do, things move. And so I think as a leader, what areas of your leadership do you think is maybe being written like you want it to? When you hear today's points as a portion of reflection over the next week, ask yourself, what kind of a leader do you want to be? Are you going to be a consensus leader? Are you going to be a leader that knows where to place a question mark? Are you open to two-way conversation? Do you expect it, but do you initiate it? You can't just want something that you are not as a leader. Do you know how to use parentheses? Is culture a buzzword? I know in our Toronto campus for a long time it was misused. And they were like, culture. And they didn't understand it. They didn't understand the power of it. They didn't understand why we did it. That was a big thing we had to shift. And sometimes when something's misused, you almost feel the need not to use it. But it's actually, how do you redeem something? So how is culture in your mind perceived? And do you have to redeem that? Do you have to redeem the idea of culture? Do you think that culture is overused? I'll tell you, it never is. As a leader, one of the best things you could learn is that when you are sick of saying it, they're just getting it. No such thing as over communication. No such thing.
Yeah, come on.
So they're my simple thoughts for today. Finished 15 minutes early. Don't know if there's any questions that you might have, but it's my grammatical leadership talk for the day. Any thoughts, questions? Chris, that messes with my mind, or I don't know how I would use that, or could you clarify this, or...
I have a question.
No questions?
I just want to know, how have you maybe had those tough conversations with someone, because obviously as pastor, but as friend, how do you cross that line from friend to being at this point, I feel like I need to give you some leadership because what you're doing or what you're currently walking out, how you're walking out is wrong. And, because I feel the friendly advice is you should pray about it, hey, don't do that. But obviously, friendly advice is not working, so it kind of is to a point where you feel you need to have a more tough conversation with them.
Yeah.
How do you do that? I don't know, it's hard, because then you also don't want to offend your friend.
Okay.
I don't know, I'm just going on, sir.
Let's use 2 Bible verses to set a precedence, okay? First of all, you've got a man of many friends must himself be friendly. And then let's take in Proverbs where it says, faithful are the wounds of deceitful are the kisses of an enemy, and faithful are the wounds of a friend. Okay, we've got a definition of what a friend does. And so we also know that someone that wants friends must themselves be a friend. So what we're hearing here, if we take those two scriptures together, is that both of you must value brutal honesty more than comfort. And if you both don't value that, then you both don't have the same marker of friendship.
That's very good.
At college night the other night, I said this simple thing. I said, let's do a litmus test of how many of you have true friends. And I just asked this. Go back and write the names of the people who literally challenged you in the last 6 months. Who in a conversation said, that's wrong? Who ever pulled you up on the fact that you're bitter? When was the last person that shut down your gossip? Who was the last person that challenged your inconsistency? Who was the last person that said you quit things a lot? Because you know what I think we live in? We live in a world of a lot of American Idol auditions. Do you know the American Idol audition where when they're told that they can't sing, which is absolutely apparent to all of us, it's news to them.
Yeah.
They're like, what? You are a hater. Not everybody that speaks truth is because they hate you. In fact, you know what I've learned? I don't know many people that will speak truth to your face that actually do hate you. People that hate you will speak truth behind your back. People that love you will take the risk of saying it to your face.
It's true.
If they've said it to you, you probably need to hear it. And I want to just say, in a world that maybe has a lot of followers and fans, we don't have a lot of friends. And we will only get friends if you can tell me who speaks the truth. And I'll tell you even this, I'll be this honest, that I even think our grow group, my grow group, could be better at this. I don't know how many people in my grow group tell each other truth. And the minute they do, it's a bit like, well, no one said you had to do it straight away. No, yeah, that's what it should be. So I think is this, Alicia, I think if you don't know that a friendship's really a friendship until you've had an opportunity to fight and you made up.
Yeah.
So
That was really good.
tell the truth and hopefully they're open to it.
Thank
But
you.
do it in love.
Beautiful.
Make sure you do it in love. Don't go out there and be like, well, Pastor Chris basically confirmed it. You're a heathen. Don't be crazy.
Chris told me to tell you.
Yeah, don't be
Love
crazy.
you guys.
All right. Any other questions on that question? Or
Yes, I do have a question.
Jay Quellen?
That's me. Let's say you're new or stepping into leadership. Where can you refer this person to, or what's a good standing point if they're new into leadership?
Yeah, that's really good. Okay. If you're new in leadership, staffy. If you're new in leadership, grow group is one of the most powerful things you could do. And if you're new in leadership, go to your grow group leader and ask them how you can lead. Why? This isn't a plug. Here's the thing. I will plug what we do because we don't do anything that we don't believe in. So there's that. But on top of that, any leader of many has to first be a leader of few. And if you can't lead few well, you definitely can't lead many. Because eventually you've got a reach issue with many. So you have to empower leaders. What did Jethro tell Moses? Put leaders of, I think it was thousands, hundreds, 50s and 20s or something, and 10s, and basically empower them. So you always have to, if you're going to lead a nation, you've got to lead it through few. So I think that the first person you should go to is your grow group leader, because that is the first setting that I think the most valuable leadership lessons will ever be learned.
That's good, Chris. Good.
And I actually kind of won't promote someone to a big sphere of leadership if they don't have a flourishing grow group. If they have not multiplied their grow group, they'll never ever lead something big, because they haven't proven that they've got the fundamental mechanics of leadership. And so I think that, Jackie. The second thing is, the third thing I would say is people college. And then the fourth thing I would say is books and resources. And then the last thing is more of a mindset. Choose to be a practitioner. You always know the difference between people that study leadership and people that actually practice it. People that study leadership tend to have a lot of opinions, and people that actually do leadership have a lot of questions. People that study leadership always think they know what they should do, and I've noticed that people in leadership are always asking, what do I do? Because the complexities of it are far deeper and wider, and they're very unique to the context. So that would be my advice if you're starting leadership. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go for it.
Awesome. Hey guys, I'm like taking on a new role in my job where we're doing like more client management work, and I want to know your opinion on how we can influence without like the authority of their boss, how we can move our clients to decisions when I'm like not their boss. I'm just like kind of working on the computer level, but we still have things we want them to do, ways we want them to work, but they're not used to that we kind of have to push them on. So what would be your perspective on like influencing when I'm not like in the highest level of authority, but still like moving people to action?
Yeah, I think if you're not a leader, you cannot lead from authority. You have to lead from motivation. You have to lead from inspiration. You have to lead from investment. And that's why it is the best place to learn leadership is learn it as a peer before you give it as a title. If you give someone a title and you back a title too much, it'll weaken their leadership. That's why, and I'm not, I might get torn up for this, but I'm gonna say it anyway, because it's actually just proven to be truth in my experience, is that's why a lot of corporate leaders will actually find that they don't have the leadership they think they have in non-corporate environments, because it's very different to say you're a leader when you're obviously responsible for someone's paycheck and you're the oversight. So like they're not going to be too crazy because they know they're going to get fired or they're going to get a warning. Whereas you take paycheck away and you take title away, people are genuinely only following you because you're worth following. So my statement I'd say to that is learn how to invest into your peers, learn how to motivate your peers, and learn how to inspire your peers. And the last one, but most important, is all of that is wrapped up by example. Do it by example. And challenge mindsets with questions. Like, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to do that. They're not paying me. And then you could say something back like, well, I'm going to do it because I'm not going to let pay determine my performance. And I reckon if I do this long enough, I'll outperform people and I'm going to keep moving. Set vision as well. Let's be the best team. We're going to be the best team. Start little competitions that no one even knows about out of fun. You know, like all those little things, they get team members going. But yeah. And then speak life. I'll tell you what, people often want to live. What I've learned as well is see the potential, speak it as a compliment, and people typically want to fulfill compliments. When I say, man, you're actually really friendly, people want to fulfill it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Any other questions? We got like 8 minutes. I'm down. Hey, you can specifically ask anyone in this room too. There's Miss Torres, go. Who's it for?
What do you think is the most important thing as followers in building culture?
Followers in building culture? Yeah, I think it's always understanding culture. Whether it's kingdom culture, church culture, corporate culture, or family culture, always seek to understand it. In fact, if you look at Deuteronomy, if you look at Leviticus, and then you go, it's a whole bunch of laws. And then you go to a moment where the Pharisees test Jesus and they say, what's the most important law? And he basically says love, which is this very conceptual almost thing. And he goes, why? Because the whole law is embodied in this one thing. Love the Lord God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength, and your neighbor as you love yourself. In this, all of them are summed up. And, or he says in another gospel, he says, and the second is just like it, and kind of says about loving your neighbor. So what you get is this sense that there's a why behind it. And even when it comes to things like it's not good to muzzle an ox, that law was not about the ox. It was about actually if somebody works for you, if somebody's doing something, they're due their wages. So God is spirit and is truth. If you just take him as truth, you'll live by the law of the letter. But if you catch the spirit, you'll get the why behind the letter. So if you're going to understand culture, you've got to understand why behind it. And I think that all believers would be better if they didn't just live what the Bible said, but they understood it. Because the Bible says he hid eternity in our hearts. And he says that if we love him, we would not sin against him. Why? It's basically saying when there is true understanding, it's not an effort to do what's right. It's a byproduct. Yeah. And so when you understand culture, you can live it. If you don't, you have to carry it. That's right. And when you carry what you don't understand, it becomes very, very heavy.
Yeah, that's very good.
That's very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. We got room for maybe 2 more, 3 more. Anyone in the room that?
I have a question.
Yep.
I have a question. Hi everybody, this is Shayla.
Hey Shayla.
So how do you impact and motivate and like inspire change when you're in a secular culture, specifically like in the workforce, if you have minimal interaction with the teams? For instance, I'll give you some background. Like in my current job, I support multiple like departments and clinics. And so I'm going into these practices and I'm collaborating with their nurses, their doctors, their managers, and I'm seeing a lot of like issues and a lot of secular, that stems from a lot of secular ideologies. And I want to make an impact, but because I have so many practices that I oversee or that I support, it makes me wonder like how can I impact change with like minimal interaction with these practices?
Yeah, that's a really great question and a very good reality and a good thing to discern as a leader. And the truth of that is not much. Because I think one of the most important laws of leadership is proximity. More is caught than is taught. And I think if that's taken away from you, that's going to be an issue. Second thing is this. You're always at the mercy of the culture of the organization. And if the leadership has different values than you do, there's going to be limits that's going to create for you. I think the next thing that comes into that is the bigger the organization, the bigger the project, the bigger the change, the bigger the ship, the slower it turns. So that means that quite often we go into something wanting to change a whole culture, but changing a culture of 10 is very different than changing a culture of 10,000. So therefore, what you have to understand is God moves in spheres of influence and he releases you to spheres. Work with the sphere that he has released you to. That sphere might be 10 people you lead, and it might also be a bit more abstract than that. From what I'm hearing with you, it might be 10 people you interact with that day. You might not even interact with them again. If you oversee a lot of things and a lot of people, you typically don't interact with the same people every day. You interact with them on a bi-weekly, sometimes quarterly, sometimes whatever. The bigger it gets, the less you interact with them. So all you can do is understand that sometimes the sphere of influence God has given you is a lunch, a phone call, and that's what you plant seeds with. I worked in a place before I went to church, and there was a lot of secular ideas, and I just basically looked for my moments to speak my truth with a lot of why behind it. And I've given this analogy, but I'll give it because it's a bit more practical to maybe what you're thinking. But I've spoken it before. It was like I had my boss. I worked for a publication they owned magazines and all this. It was a publishing company. And she asked me to sell the adult ads and the personals, which is basically like prostitution and all that, and sell those ads. And I said, I'm not going to sell that. And she goes, why? I go, well, because I don't believe in it. She goes, well, you're not the one doing it. You're not the one cheating on your wife. You're not the one doing the wrong thing. I go, yeah, true. But if I know someone's suicidal, I'm not going to point them to the gun. And she just stopped. And she was like, she didn't know what to say. And she just said in her very thick Irish accent that I'm the kind of boy you want to take home to your mother. But my friends thought I committed corporate suicide, but usually leaders speak up and corporations look for leaders. And so from her, I gained her respect, but from my peers, I gave just a little nugget of truth that might be a different way to think about things. Sometimes we want to create truth, and sometimes you got to chip away at it.
Well, that's
That's the sphere of influence you might have right now. A chipping away kind of influence.
Yeah, that's real. Thank you so much. That's confirmation. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, guys, that's all we have time for today. I've really enjoyed Staffy. Love you all, me included, along with all of us here. I'm hoping to work on my grammatical leadership. I will be taking today's lesson away and like chewing on it for the rest until next week. What I get out of it will determine if we do another one. But I definitely know that I've got to keep asking the question, is my leadership telling the story I want it to? And I think that'd be the same for all of us, okay? All right, love you guys. Hey, keep fasting and praying. Attach big faith to your fasting. Don't just go through the motions. Attach faith. It's going to be awesome. See you guys on Sunday.